Hey, Social Work 540. You are in your final week. This is week number 7, and I'm going to spend just a few minutes going over a couple of things from this week's readings in order to set you up for your final week's discussion forums. So your readings this week are pretty heady, and they take on some very large macroeconomic justice concepts and social justice concepts dealing with the economy, dealing with globalization, dealing with world systems and poverty and development issues in a lot of different countries. Your reading for the discussion post this week, the Samadhi article about Islamophobia, is also a pretty dense article, but it contains a lot of very good information about really challenging us to think about the different ways that we have transformed racism in our modern society. And it looks at racism as a cultural issue rather than a issue based on biology. So I just want to focus on a couple of passages that I think really capture the kind of crux of the Samadhi article. I do want you to read the whole thing, but I want to make sure that you capture these because I think it really kind of highlights some key concepts that'll help us understand how to approach the discussion forum posts. So this is from page 265 in the article. And he says, is there a shift in the forms and strategies of racism that corresponds to this shift from race as biology to race as culture? So he's talking about the way that we view what race is, whether it's something based on biological components or whether it's something identifiable in cultural components, so language, dress, religion, belief systems. There is a shift in the dominant theoretical form of racism. Racist theory based on biology, modern racism, is replaced by one based on culture, imperial racism. Imperialist racist theory agrees with the thrust of modern anti-racism in that race is a social construction, as we read about in the Smedley and Smedley article, that individual behavior or aptitude cannot be attributed to biological origins. Instead, they are the product of different cultures. Up to this point, Hart and Negri 2000 argue imperial racism and modern anti-racism are taking the same position. So while we're talking about the fact that individual differences or views of superiority versus inferiority or otherness, as is discussed in this article, are not based on biological origins, we're saying that they still exist, right? And society is saying that they still exist. But they're not, while they're not attributed to biological origins, they're being attributed to cultural origins. And they're being discriminated against in the same amount and in the same fashion. So he further talks about Islamophobia, discrimination against Islam and people who are identified with the culture of Islam or the religion of Islam, as is discussed in the article. So Islamophobia is a cultural ideological outlook that seeks to explain ills of the global social order by attributing them to Islam. It is a way of thinking that conflates histories, politics, societies, and cultures of the Middle East into a single unified and negative conception of Islam. It is an ideology in which the backwardness of the other is established through an essentialized Islam. It is, as a form of racism, an essentialist view of peoples whose culture it deems different in an eternal, fixed, and immutable fashion. It is a way of conceptualizing international politics that explains political acts and political violence not in terms of geopolitical calculations, motives, and actors, but in terms of religion. Islamophobia posits Islam as a conception of the world that is incompatible with modernity, with civilization, and more important, with Euro-Americanness. Islamophobia, on the one hand, creates difference by referring to the other, and on the other hand, erases difference by implying all of them are the same. So this is very important and helps us understand some of the different approaches to looking at the way that our society over time has viewed people of the Islamic faith or Arab Americans or Muslim descent or whatever the particular characterization of identity as being all part of the same culture and belief system, and has made them part of a group that we have vilified and kind of cast off into this otherness and have attached a sense of threat to that group of people. So this article really discusses the development of those attitudes and beliefs and some of the ramifications for those beliefs in pointing out different ways that people have been discriminated against and how this racism, this form of racism, has been applied in modern society. So related to that, it leads us to our discussion, one of our discussion forum posts for this week. So first, you're going to talk about, in your words, what you think Samadi is arguing in his article. So he has an opinion about the ways that Islamophobia is showing up in public policies in the United States and Western Europe. What are the pieces of his argument with which you agree? What are the pieces with which you disagree? So talk about the way that you understand the arguments that he's making, and how you understand or can have seen and can identify some of the concepts that he presents. So then, given what you learned in the NPR report and from the supplemental materials that are provided in the prompt about France's ban on the burqa and the ability for women or religious symbols to be present in public spaces, particularly those that cover the face, how do you think that such a proposed ban would fare in the United States? So this involves questions of religious liberty, it involves questions of freedom of speech, it involves questions of choice, of obligation, of force, of identity, and cultural roles and responsibilities of who kind of decides these things for women, whether it's women, whether it's their partner, whether it's their imam, whether it's their community. All of these kinds of questions are a part of our ability to think through how this would go in the United States and how it's going in France and other places in Europe. So do you think that a politician proposing such a ban would receive support for this in the United States? Think about what that would look like across the United States, or think about what that might look like in rural communities where maybe Muslims are not the majority, and then other communities where there are large communities of Muslims. What does that look like, and how would politicians be received as they propose such a ban? Why might some people support this ban, and why might some people object to such a ban? So this post is to kind of prompt your own individual reflection, and it should be posted by Sunday. You don't need to respond to anyone else's post. The idea is for you to kind of think through your own understanding of these concepts and your own reflections on these issues, but you are certainly invited to look at other people's posts and kind of reflect and think about where we all are on this subject. And then finally, your discussion post involving your policy brief. You're going to post your policy brief by Thursday, and then by Sunday, you're going to respond to 3 classmates' briefs and talk about your impressions of their policy recommendations, whether you agree, disagree, support, oppose, all of those things. Really kind of get in there and think about how to view other people's policy proposals and recommendations on those social issues. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to contact me. I've really enjoyed working with you this semester, and I wish you the best in the rest of the program.